Hello, everyone. I have a super special guest with me today. I would like to introduce to you the one, the only. He's all the way from the land down under, bringing the thunder. It's Christopher Mattiske. Christopher, how you doing today?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah.
I'm very honored to have you here on my little show, FFTCG show.
So good. I mean, I didn't actually have to go anywhere. I'm still in Australia.
Right?
But...
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the beauty of
Pleasure to be here.
modern technology and the internet. Even though there are TCG players from all around the world, we don't have to be at a world tournament to still connect and all that nonsense, which is great. So, we have a very special topic today, and that's why I needed a special guest to help me do it. And it's very appropriate because today, the time of this recording, probably won't be true when you folks see this, but a Opus 13 spoiler came out, which was a new monster, and it was our first monster for Opus 13. So we're going to be talking about monsters today and just kind of where they're at in the TCG, because plenty of people have run monster decks. There are decks out there that, really focus on them, and while those are always fun, rarely do they seem to be that competitive. They don't seem to take, high places at many events, and in general, most people tend to shy away from them. You have your few folks who are really dedicated to monsters, but they just haven't really caught on, and they've been around since Opus 4, I think, is when they were first introduced.
Yep.
And I was thinking about this, Chris, before I got you on here, was that they've really tried a lot of things with these monsters. They've tried, think of Opus 11, they had monsters that got counters on them, and then they also had monsters you could discard from hand for an action ability, and then remove a backup, and other monsters have had discard from hand effects. Opus 9 had these monsters that were forwards only on your turn. We've had monsters that turn into forwards, and this new one, Opus 12 had these monsters. It's you can make them a forward, or you can have this one-time entry effect. So they have tried so many things with monsters, and they're just not catching on. So starting off, what do you think that is?
Okay, there is multiple reasons, I would say. There's two main reasons, I think. The first one is that the card type, the problem with FF is that, well, not problem, but the thing about FF is to play the game, you have to have backups and forwards, right? You have to play backups, you have to play forwards. And that's already quite a bit of your CP will be doing that. And then, you want to have cards, you want to have cards in hand, you want to be able to have options and things you can do. And if you have that spare CP, in general, you would like it to be available for summon. If you're not investing more into the board, you have it there for casting summons as the instant speed, sort of the surprise factor that gives you an edge in combat, all that kind of stuff. So that's already most of your CP is already kind of going into those things. So to have a card type that doesn't do any of those things it's quite an investment, and it's there needs to be fulfill a really specific role to be worth doing that. And I think that that's not it. That's possible. they can make monsters like that, but they just, a lot of them haven't really, I think, and they seem to be taking a lot of concessions. They seem to be doing they're giving monsters the wrong thing. So the monsters you talked about, the ones that can either be a forward or do something by sacking them. They have flexibility where they can be either a forward or a sort of non-instant speed summon. But as a result of that, they made them not very powerful. They're not very cost efficient at all in either case. In fact, they're really overcosted for both effects. And that flexibility is good, but usually only if you have a good base case. And so neither of those base cases are worthwhile. Whereas if you think of a card like Diabolos or Kadaj, who have flexibility and options they can do, and also just, even if you removed all of Diabolos' other text and just said activate your backups and kill a 5 cost, it still would have been good. Kadaj, you could remove probably his enters and he would still be decent.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of something they've missed out on a bit. And the other one you mentioned, where they're the ones that remove one to do an effect, or you can play them as a guy only during your turn, they're similar. They're both parts of it are overcosted, and the flexibility isn't enough to make up for that.
So,
and then
if they more appropriately costed these, do you think that would make a difference, or do you think there is something just kind of that would make a difference?
Absolutely. I think that they're too close to the cost of summons, and the problem with that is that the whole reason summons are most summons, just their effect by itself is usually overcosted, but the thing that makes them worth playing is the instant speed part.
Right.
So
you do it on your opponent.
In opponent's turn and in response, and it changes the result of something. Something happens differently to what your opponent expects, and that's usually where you get that's how you make up for the extra cost sort of thing. That's like the extra advantage you get. And yeah, monsters can't really do that. Well, I mean, they kind of, and then you've got the other ones that, you put on the field and they have instant speed effect on the field. And that, can kind of do that, but your opponent can still see it. So it doesn't really have the benefit is not quite there. It's more of a, they force it out rather than, flip something around. Yeah.
No, that's a really good point. I believe there was a monster that came out. It was either this Opus 12, or it was Opus 11, but it was an ice monster. And it basically had Glaciolabilus's effect, like it could dull freeze something. But, it wasn't at instant speed. It was like, it was a monster, so you had to play it during your turn phase. And it was just like, why would you ever pick that? And I think it was like 3 cards, too. Yeah, it was basically a bad version of Glaciolabulus. I was just like, why?
Yep.
So we have seen some monsters, that have been used a lot. In particular, I remember watching the World stream, and in Opus X, all the monsters revolved around the new damage keyword. And 2 in particular that I can remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were there, the ones that were the most popular were Unsaganashi in Wind and Kamakamui in Lightning, the one that reduced powers. So why were those so popular? Obviously, they have very strong effects.
Yeah, Unsaganashi is, I'm glad you brought it up, because I was going to mention there are a couple of monsters in the game, they have actually hit the right sort of, they've just got it just right sort of thing in terms of the effect is good enough to kind of justify those drawbacks I mentioned. Unsaganashi is one of them, because it gives you something that nothing else in the game does almost, except like a couple of other cards, like Ishtola is similar, but that's also really good for the same reason, is that it gives you something that nothing else does, where like it almost means something, your opponent can't deal with something. Like they can, but it will take them an amount of time. So it kind of guarantees that certain cards get to do what they want to do. So, Ishtola, basically, your opponent can't Shantoto you while you have Ishtola out. And that's like a huge thing for the card. It means that you can play as many forwards as you want. As long as you have an Ishtola, you're not going to get punished by Shantoto. I mean, I know that's not 100% true all the time, but that's like in general a thing. And then Unsaganashi is similar. If you have a really good forward and you put Unsaganashi on it, that forward is probably going to live for an amount of time, which means that it will get to do its good stuff. So something like Yazmat, who has like really good effects every turn, that have an Unsaganashi on that, it's really hard for them to deal with it before it pushes your CP over the edge, kind of thing. And especially the fact, the thing I love about Unsaganashi is bringing out with Realm, but Realm is another topic, which I'm sure you were going to bring up later, so I'll just sideline that for a second.
No, so that's... Oh, sorry, go ahead. Please finish.
No, I was just saying that's Unsaganashi, that's kind of the big thing with that, is that it definitely does something that nothing else in the game can do. Whereas, all these other monsters like, the ice one you mentioned, or like the fire ones that just kind of deal damage to something, that kind of thing. We get all those effects from like forwards and summons and other things that we can do that. Whereas Insag, you don't really have that. Except that there's that new card actually mid that it does that kind of thing. Which
like back attack protector.
Yeah, that guy. So they're starting to do a bit more of that. But yeah, for a long time, Insag's really been the only
it's interesting you say that, because one of my favorite monsters, and a monster that I don't know how much competitive play it seemed, but it just seemed like people do really like this monster, is Deathgaze 9 from Opus 8.
Oh, yes, that's a good point. Yep.
And what you just said kind of rung a bell. Is like, oh yeah, nothing else really does that. Nothing else has this, hey, I'm just going to put this guy down, and I've just removed your guy from the field. And because so few people run Monster Hate, it's very unlikely that someone's going to break the Deathgaze to get it back.
Actually, and I actually forgot about that. That's good you mentioned that as well, because that goes against that's one of the ones that's actually costed effectively, in my opinion. Like, I've mentioned the other ones are all costed really efficiently. That is one of the efficient ones. So that's why that's all play, because it actually was kind of worth its cost, that effect. And as like you said, it's good as long as your opponent doesn't have monster removal. Like, if they have monster removal, that becomes a lot worse, as you've alluded to. And so I would say that's probably why it's dropped off, is because of Starter Shantoto that can kill it. The Night Ghost one, Rampare, that kind of stuff, and Dark Sephiroth that can deal with it as well, which is a problem for it. There was something else I'm pretty sure, I can't remember. Lock can kill as well, actually, now, the new Lock. So yeah, now that there are things hanging around that can kill it in competitive decks, I think that's why it's sort of disappeared. But yeah, you're right.
No, that's a really good point. So, like Kana Kamui, he reduced power. Something I thought they very smartly designed with those Opus X monsters was that their action ability could be activated the moment they hit the field. So even if, like you said, your opponent's Lock came in and Lock said, kill that Unsaganashi, you could be like, okay, well, in response, I'm at least going to break him and use it. So basically, unless you had something that canceled an action ability, they were always going to get that effect off, which I thought made them very strong. I want to ask about Kana Kamui, because he reduced power, but there was a lot of things in the game that reduced power. That's not unique to him. So what made that monster, especially in the Rampare deck, what made him so?
I believe the reason Rampare specifically was... Hang on, there was something else. Okay. For starters, it was a lightning. It's lightning CP off of Nagmalada.
Oh yeah.
So Nagmalada saw play during that time. Scale Toad was something to search with it, for the record. That was like its main target, I believe. But also, Kanekimui gave you a lightning option for that. The other big one was that revival by Shantoto. We mentioned Shantoto before. So it was removal that Shantoto could bring out. That could kill forwards that were not 3 or less. Because obviously she can only kill forwards that cost 3 or less.
Yeah.
So it gave you a way to remove bigger things, especially on the high damage, like you mentioned. It's 9k, right? On
at damage 5, it was 9,000.
Yeah, so that's kind of like a key sort of value you can hit, especially when if you don't have if you've already used. Sorry, you're not playing Prish right in that instance. If you're playing the Shantoto instead of the Prish, so that negative power is a very nice, reliable way to deal with things. Also, like you mentioned, it's like a deferred removal in that case. So you have it on the field, and now you can remove something without paying anything. You paid for the Kanekimui before, but that might have been a time where there wasn't anything to kill, nothing you care about, and then you've got it sitting there, and that will protect you from when something else happens. So if they played Rain, for example, right, that if you've got a Kanekimui sitting there with its the extra damage or whatever, then your opponent will not get one of their Rain turns. They won't get because you use it on Rain attack prep, and then that turn they don't get to use a removal and everything in haste.
And those particular monsters had that instant speed you were talking about.
Yes.
Like you said, the moment you needed it, okay, there it goes. So I can see that made a big difference. Interesting. Okay, so I'm learning a lot about monsters here. So something I want to ask you is, originally when a lot of these monsters came out, a lot of them had this effect: pay 1 water, pay whatever, and it becomes a forward till the end of the then attacks. Whereas like Opus 9, we had these ones that were only forwards on your turn, and it seems they're kind of experiment with that again. And that one we saw today, at damage 3, it becomes a forward. So how do you feel about that with monsters? Because on one hand, part of me thinks the fact that they aren't forwards is kind of an advantage, because again, they won't get wiped out by a Shantoto, Valafor, Fina. They're going to avoid all that board-wide stuff. But or is there some kind of a downside to that too? The fact that they're always just hanging out. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that I was going to mention. That's the other inherent design issue with the thing that kind of makes balancing them hard is that, like you said, if there's a really good monster, then monster remove not every deck has monster removal. Suddenly, if you have a really good monster, then you now have this binary situation of there's a really good card. My only way to deal with it is if I draw the exact thing that says kill it, kind of thing. It's sort of like the removal versus floodgate. Other games have that in a lot of things with like side deck cards and stuff where, I've got this thing that's really good, and the only way to deal with it is not about making decisions to, play around or anything. It's, do I have the card to kill it or not? But then also that card might not do anything else really relevant. So then, if I don't have that and I have this card in my deck and I just draw it and it does nothing, that's a bit not as bad in FF because we've got, discard for CP as a mechanic, which is nice. So I think that restricts to how they design monsters quite a bit. I reckon that's one of the reasons they are very, tentative about making like good monsters on the field, because, suddenly the Cactuar was an example. I mean, they banned Dodaluma, which is fine. But, while that was around, realistically, like Dodaluma itself isn't a ridiculous overpowered card. It's the fact that we had a reliable way to deal damage to it ourselves that made it so oppressive. And one of the problems with that was Cactuar, there wasn't really a good way to get to it without including specific cards that say kill Cactuar in your deck. So there's that.
I remember that big debate when he got banned where, there was this, well, who's really the problem? Is it Dadaluma?
Yeah.
Cactuar? And some people were like, well, it's Cactuar because he's the enabler. I was personally in the camp of like, right, but a Cactuar on its own is a balanced card, where a Dadaluma, even if a Cactuar, is still a pain in the butt to deal with. Like,
yeah. And the cool thing about Cactuar, I think, is that actually, besides Dodaluma, the other stuff it enables is fine. Like, Orlando, stuff that deals with damage things. Cactuar is a nice way of having a reliable output for that you can, use multiple times. And actually, the 10k effect is also pretty balanced. Like you said, it's, you've got the instant removal without a cost. Like, you take damage, that thing. I do like Cactuar's design, so I'm glad they left that as is. And,
I like it. Well, and that's the thing, like, there's some monsters, and if you've got any off the top of your head, you can think of, like, I think Scale Toad's really well designed. I like that card. Even though it sucks to play against it, but, it does feel like it was at least thought about as far as expense and cost, and I don't know. What do you think about Scale Toad?
Yeah, Scale Toad. I have a bit of I'm not going to say love-hate relationship. It's more of a just-hate relationship.
To play against, I agree.
Yes, I'm a fan of those kind of cards that sort of they force people to play off the top, basically.
Yeah.
I don't like that design, because I don't like the idea that the game is now down to who draws better cards off the top rather than how we use the cards we have.
Yeah.
You know, the moment you push your opponents down to, you know, only allowed to have 1 or 0 cards in their hand, we can't really plan ahead anymore. Yeah, the game comes a lot more down to the variance of what we draw rather than the way we use the cards we have access to. So that's my thing I don't like about it. And that's the same. I have a similar issue with the 7-cost Sephiroth. You know, when people might like dump their hand in 7-cost Sephiroth, chuck a special or whatever, you know, they've basically just made both their hands 0. Right. And so now, yeah, we're playing a game of who can drop it rather than...
Been on the receiving end of many of those. It's not enjoyable.
Yeah, but yes, I won't argue that I would say Scale Toad is balanced in terms of, like, you know, it is technically balanced. Like, it's not overpowered. Right. It's not, you know, overly efficient. It's, you know, it's quite an investment to play a Scale Toad to the field. It's just, yeah, really... annoying.
I have
and
to ask you about this one because we were chatting on Messenger once, and I don't know, you gave a very coy response when I mentioned Flandit, and you said I have a very specific opinion about Flandit.
Oh yes, that was yes.
What's your feeling?
I remember the amount of people that I've mentioned Flandit to. I have a very, very low opinion of Flandit. Anyone who's heard me talk about it knows that I think that card is an absolute trap. It hasn't seen play, you know, recently at all, which is fine. People have, you know, experimented with it here or there, and put it in their deck, you know, oh yeah, play Flandit, you know, and it's cute. Like, you know, it's a card that does something, you know, have it on the field, does something every turn. You know, you feel like, yeah, it's cool. You know, I'm sort of like, you know, getting repeated use out of this card. Realistically, the actual thing that it does is not good. The problem is, if you play a Flandit, you've now, you know, invested 3 CP effectively. You've paid 1, and it's not really a body or anything. So the 2 CP of the card it has is not really doing anything. So you basically, you know, gone down 3 CP to put this card on the field. And so the only way to get that CP back is if your opponent like pays for its effect. So if they actually pay the 1, right? And the only reason they're ever going to do that is if they're about to win the game, or if they're going to get more CP off that attack anyway than it's taking away. So I mean, Ritz isn't like, you know, obvious exaggerated example, but if they've got a Ritz on the field and you Flanded it and they go, okay, I pay 1, and they swing with the Ritz and get 3 back, like if the Flander hasn't done anything, right? Even though it's the effect resolved the way you wanted it to, it still didn't actually do anything. Whereas, you know, maybe it'll prevent a damage here or there, but the CP you put into that is not really worth it. And I don't think the person playing Flander, I don't think they realize how little it's doing for their opponent, because, you know, it's the opponent's the one who gets that perspective on, you know, what they're doing. So that's why I kind of thought it was a bit of a trap. When you get ahead of someone in a game and use Flandit, there is this feeling of like, oh, I'm choking them out, like I'm restricting their resources because I'm already ahead. But I can see your point that, well, you're already ahead though, that's why you're winning. The Flandit is just piling on the fact that you're already ahead. That's a good point as well. And the fact that, yeah, if you'd spent that CP on something else other than Flandit while you're ahead, that's probably still gonna, you know, you'll still be winning just as much, right? Yeah. That'll still help, you know, push your win further. You know, it doesn't need to be Flandit. That could be spent elsewhere. But anyway, that's I understand other people have, you know, higher opinions of it, and I'm not going to claim that my opinion is, you know, this is my experience with the card anyway. Yeah. I appreciate you saying it. Okay, well, let's talk about your girl Realm, because I know how much you like that card. I think everybody. Okay, I do love Realm. It came out in Opus XI, and just how it just gave such an instant like boost to monsters. Yeah. It was nice that it wasn't restricted to like, oh, it's got to be an Earth monster, or it's got to be, you know, it was just 1 cost and 2 costs, but there's plenty of those. So tell me about Realm. Yes. Is she a good thing for monsters to have? Yeah. When she was first released, I was a little bit concerned because, you know, CP-wise, her effect is completely like undercosted, right? Like she's a -2 cost, right? Which is that's Pain's cost for the record. That's starter Pain, like full setup starter Pain's like CP worth. And so that was my first concern was that I was like, whoa, okay, that's a bit extreme. But I mean, obviously I've played it a lot now, and it's not overpowered. In fact, the deck building cost for it is actually more relevant than I initially gave credit for. The fact that you have to play, I would say, about 6 monsters to be reliable. And then, you know, that's a good chunk, that's a large portion of your deck is, you know, just those monsters. And the other part is that, yeah, of the monsters that are available, anyone who's seen me play, it's basically always Goblin and Saganashi for me, pretty much. There's very few situations where other ones are good. Because those two just, they kind of do so much for certain cards that they, you know, it's just a really nice package. And the fact that Goblin gives your card back, you know, sort of, I like that. But also, those are often off color. So that part of the deck winning cost is, you know, super relevant. So I actually do think she's fairly well designed. So that's my main thing. It's kind of sad. I will admit that it is kind of sad that by the time she came out, you were talking about, you know, like monster decks, like decks with lots of monsters, you know, and they sort of, that's their thing they do. And I did like those kind of decks when they existed, and I had a bit of fun with them. I think it's a little bit sad that Realm came out a bit too late to get full, you know, benefit out of her end phase ability. So that's one sad part. You know, by the time that would have been really good for those kind of monster decks, but you know, by the time she came out, they are not really playable anymore. The worst part about her end phase, and this is I guess more relevant in Opus last set than this set because Braska's not really around, but it's actually a liability because it's mandatory.
Yeah,
so if you've got a Realm and your opponent just plays a Braska's there on the forward, then one of your forwards is dying. That is very sad, boys.
I have to give a special shout out to one of my favorite monsters that I love, and I love playing him. But man, he struggles, and that's Osma. I believe he came out.
Yeah, actually, good point. No, yeah,
I love Osma, and you know he's the super boss from Final Fantasy IX. And his Flare Star special is in theory really cool, and it board wipe. But even using it, sometimes it misses, especially as things kind of like get more undercosted as we get more cost 9Ks. It's like, okay, well, he's not even going to get them. And, you know, he's got like this niche little thing where like, oh, I don't take damage from dark guys and make him a four. Like, he's a cool card.
Yep.
But every time I use him, I also feel like I'm working so hard to get this guy to like be the crazy boss I want him to be. It'd be just easier to just play a forward that would.
Yep. No, I actually, thank you for bringing up Osma. I forgot about it again, but that card is actually cool, and that was one of my favorite things about like monster decks, like, you know, water-based monster decks, having Osma, because you're right, Flare Star was actually really cool, honestly. I think maybe my favorite thing in the world in those kind of water-based monster decks was having a Realm and turning one of your opponent's monsters into a forward before using like Flare Star or something, or Shantoto sometimes. I got to do that against Kageyama in a gunslinger match, and that was really satisfying.
Oh, did you? That's awesome.
Yeah. It was that kind of, I like those kind of cute things. Osma is also, that was the first example of a monster that cost 0 to transform, I believe. I don't think the other ones were out yet, if I remember correctly. Or was it the same time? Maybe it was the same time. But that was a good step forward. So you did bring up the monsters that paid CP to turn into forwards before. The problem with those was, you know, you're constantly paying. If you want them to be a body, you have to keep paying for it, and that's really inefficient.
That's one of the reasons I love the Gigas monster, the Earth, the cost. And he was at Worlds. I think Kaka had him in his deck in the finals. That Wind Earth deck. And he's just such a cool, because like you said, you don't have to. There's no cost, so just for free at any time. Hey, big 9K blocker here. You don't necessarily have to attack to, you know, basically make him freeze himself.
Yeah. And I think the big thing about it in that deck was the synergy with Shantoto forward. So that's why it's in there, I would say, because I had a deck similar to that as well. I mean, way before that. So like the Shantoto forward stuff, like that's the choice of, you know, having it either be a monster or a forward, depending on, you know, like this turn I want it to be forward, but then other than that I can, you know, it dodges removal and your board wipes, that kind of stuff. That's like the nice thing about those kind of things. And the thing I like most about that, you don't need specific monster removal for them. You know, if they never turn into a forward, then they're not doing anything. Whereas when they turn into a forward, now you do have access to the forward removal to kill them. So they bypass that sort of grey area of balance, which is nice.
Yeah.
So I think that, Gigas and Osma are two good examples of that. A lot of the others were really underpowered. So they didn't really. I actually, Mattiske I didn't mind. But the others.
That one. I don't know what he does.
It's a 3-cost ice, 5k, when it attacks, style something. So it's kind of got its own like inbuilt snow. It's like a monster snow base.
I gotcha.
That one was decent, honestly, for a little bit. But the others, like stuff like the Fire One Goblin, and I can't even remember some of the others. They were much less powerful.
So, kind of thinking about Realm, I think monsters do have pretty good support. Like, there are plenty of cards that fetch you out monsters. I remember Larketius was also kind of popular there. For
actually, yep.
So, like, they have characters that will search monsters. There's, like, that new Stiltskin backup coming out. He can search a 1 CP monster.
Urianger. Urianger's the big one. I think Urianger makes 1-cost monsters hard to balance, because you release a good 1-cost monster, Urianger makes that really good, or like really efficient at least, you know, to bring it out.
But I think
and also
have the support. Like, there are cards.
I agree.
Built for him. I guess maybe that's kind of why it's weird too for me that, you know, I've seen other archetypes and tribals and things that's like they just don't have any support. Like, it's no wonder nobody. You know, but when I was looking at monsters and I was thinking about those, like, they really do have a lot of cards that fetch them or bring them back. So what's holding them back?
Well, I guess that probably plays into the whole the balance thing, where they, you know, the monsters they release seem to be underpowered or inefficient is probably due to that to an extent. You know, the fact that if they do make a really good one, there's so much support for it, especially the revivals and stuff like that. There's a card that's really good for reviving monsters that I can't remember. That's like, it's not Gao. Nah, Gao's okay, but
Gao, Larkeishus. I'm trying to think.
No, Larkeishus is quite good, honestly. I think that's really well designed support. Yeah, I might think of it later.
I'm trying to think.
Urianger is the big one, especially now that Scion's new Scion starter deck.
Yeah,
Scions might be playable again. Urianger might, have the, although they have their own Urianger now, like a Scion support one, which does also seem quite good for that deck. So maybe that's not going to happen anyway. But definitely, Urianger, Thancred and Stola are both Scions, right? Like the 7-cost Thancred and the 3-cost Stola, and those are both good cards on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Thancred's even in the same color as Urianger.
Right.
So, there is other Scions you can use without going full Scion deck to get, higher cost monsters.
Well, and I remember and I joined around end of Opus 7, and before Dadaloom was banned in Opus 8, in the early decks, people would still have Urianger in there just to get the Cactuar out, or the late.
Because it's an efficient way to play it, because, playing a Cactuar, it's that kind of the neg 3C people think similar to Flander, whereas play it with an Urianger, you get a body, and the Cactuar's, much cheaper in that sense.
Okay, so are there any monsters I haven't mentioned yet that, like, you want to give a shout out to, or that you're like, oh yeah, I want to talk about this one?
A bit of trivia. The monsters that trigger to turn into forwards when something happens, their text has changed like multiple times.
Really?
So the original text, according to the original text, rules-wise, you can turn it into a forward more than once, because it says it won't transform if it's already a forward. Sorry, it won't resolve if it's already it won't trigger if it's already a forward. Okay. But it doesn't say it won't resolve if it's already a forward. So realistically, if you have something like Sahuagin Chief, the one that not Chief, it's just Geoscano, right? So if you bounce 2 forwards, say you use Sildra, where you have Geoscano on the field, technically you're going to have a Geoscano that turns into a forward twice, and it's going to have 2 instances of its prevent damage effect. So it should take 2,000 less each time. According to the rules, according to the text and the rules and everything. And I brought this up on Twitter or somewhere, I can't remember. And they were like, oh, okay, and they errated them. They made an errata on the official site, like the official database. I was like, okay, cool, yep, okay, that makes sense. Now said it won't. I can't remember the exact text, but it also clarified that it wouldn't happen if it was already a forward. That was cool. But then the text switched back later randomly for apparently no reason. I'm wondering what it is at the moment, because I brought this up again, and Kageyama responded to that tweet. I'm wondering whether it's should be switched back. I'm just going to quickly search. No, they haven't changed it back yet. So, yeah, it's now back to its original text. So I don't know what happened there. I don't know why they errated. If they were just going to switch it back, I don't know why they errated it in the first place.
Right.
And I also don't know why they would switch it back to the text that's wrong. Anyway, that's just a weird little
like printing press and like swapped out the palettes. Like, all right, we're going to put the old one back in here.
It's just like their official database does have up-to-date text, so it's really weird that they would. Anyway, that's just some random trivia.
No, that's awesome. I'm glad you did that. So you made a good point about that. If we want to make monsters like, let's say, viable competitively, however you want to think about it, that they basically need more cost efficiency. So for whatever their effect is, it needs to be more. Do you think that alone would make a big difference, or do you think, again, there's something maybe just inherently to what a monster is and how it's designed that is always going to mess with it?
Yeah, well, I guess the cost of it, that plays into the cost efficiency. I would say, like, when I say if the card is cost efficient or cost effective, then I'm kind of including the sort of inherent drawbacks about, in a monster's case, that doesn't turn into a forward, the fact that it doesn't develop any of those other parts of your game that you kind of need to play, especially the forwards and backups part. So I think that's why they've, pushed really heavily into monsters that can be forwards, because it kind of takes away that sort of drawback a bit. For it to be, effective, cost effective, if it's not going to be a forward, it's dangerous because monster removal is scarce, like I said. But also, we would play it. If it's cost effective, we will play it. What it does is worth its cost, then we'll do it. If it's not too much an investment to do nothing else for that effect, and that effect is good enough that you can justify doing that, then of course we'll play it.
Right.
I guess it's
So this is a funny little interaction, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah.
So every single monster who can become a forward, its text, every single one of them, their text says, also becomes a forward, so it still technically remains a monster. Because I remember my buddy did something that would like broke monsters, and I was like, on the stack, I'll turn it into a forward, and he's like, yeah, it still kills it. And I was like, how? It's
Yeah.
And he's like, well, because it's also. I was like, oh gosh, darn it! Like, do you think that's relevant at all, or is that just kind of like, whatever,
Yeah.
it just kind of has to be?
It can be. I think the forwards that can be monsters, that's technically a drawback. So if you have
that's what I thought.
a monster forward compared to just a regular forward, that is actually a drawback. And so if monster removal exists, like lock is an example at the moment, a relevant example at the moment. Suddenly you have a forward that also just randomly dies a lock.
Right, exactly. You can't go Osma. Oh, Osma, turn into a forward to protect yourself. Nope, it still dies with the lock trigger. Like,
actually, Osma was also a very funny one because the text doesn't take damage from dark characters. I think that Cam Lenort was a big dark character at the time while Osma was around, and he is not dark. He turns himself into not dark.
Something else.
So. And the other card, the Emperor, was another card that was, it was falling off a lot by there. That was another, dark forward around. And both those, so there were these two dark characters, and Osma has this text that doesn't take damage from dark characters, but it didn't matter, because those two both inherently got around it anyway.
Yeah. I'll say he can turn into a forward when Emperor's out.
Yes. Yes. So I always found that a bit funny.
Yeah, I think that's supposed to be that thematic thing in the game because and they love to put in those thematic themes, and sometimes they really work, and other times it's like, that doesn't do anything. Thanks though. Yeah.
Funny. It's funny though. Now you mention it, like if Osma had been playable recently, then it would have been a nice way to kind of block a Kadaj attack every turn.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that would have been.
Which is pretty funny.
Been amazing.
I didn't even think about that until you.
Either.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of cute. Too bad it's a bit past its time now, but yeah. Because I mentioned Mirror, the Legend Mirror, the 2-cost one.
Yeah.
That's
cheaper, right?
Yeah, every monster you play gets cheaper, and the ones you sack replace themselves. You get to search another one. So that I think does actually also balance concern in terms of it makes them cheaper, and also the ones that have sacrificial effects, it self-replaces them. So that's actually, greatly increases the efficiency of your monsters. Actually, I really liked the design. I enjoyed playing that card for a time until now it's kind of fallen off. So I think that's a card to keep in your mind, I guess, when as more monsters come out, as especially ones that can sacrifice themselves. Exo Ray, I think there was there's a cute deck you could make when Exo Ray first came out with Mirror. Tilliker and stuff like that, and you could draw a bunch of cards for like nothing. Right. That's kind of cool, but I guess that was held back for other reasons. Yeah, they like I said, they've got good support. Like there are cards that actually do good things with monsters. It's just a matter of finding the right monsters to make them do something. I was gonna say another card that never really saw play was Azul, the 5-cost 8 or 8k maybe, that when it dies brings out a 3-cost lightning monster. There was a wind forward, very old, cost 4-cost 5k that brings out a 4-cost wind monster even, I think. Those kind of cards, they actually would have been very efficient for their time if there was any good targets for them, but there wasn't. So that was always a shame. So there's a lot of that kind of going on. I think they've kind of missed some opportunities with certain sort of slots they could have put monsters in.
Absolutely. Well, and it just seems like every Opus they try to give each monster, in Opus 10 it was the damage keyword, so they're trying to give them, this is their thing they do for this Opus. Opus 9 again, it was their forwards only on your turn. Opus 11 was the corners and the discard, and some of them are neat. Like I love Malboro from Opus 9, that when he is blocked or hits your blocked or he hits your he reduces the whole board by 2,000. He was so fun, but again, you never could block with them, so that never really felt very good. And I thought some of the counter ones were kind of neat, especially in like mono decks. But I wonder if too, like you were saying about deck space, and that even on FF decks, the monsters are labeled right below the summons, so a lot of people think of them as replacements for summons, and that if I'm putting in monsters, I'm cutting summons out. So it needs to have an effect that is so strong that it makes it worth it to not put that summon in. Or
exactly. And you gave a good example before. A lot of the ice ones say dull or freeze something, and you got a summon like Glacial Bolus as an option over that, and the fact that you can do that at instant speed, that's just going to trump it, because the good thing about that card is that it changes how your opponent's turn goes in a way they can't see happening, and that's just better than saying, hey, I'm dulling or freezing right in your turn, and then they do whatever they're going to do.
Right. There was that uncertainty with there's a lot of like, oh well, in this specific situation, I really enjoyed the counter monsters, but one of the things was you really kind of wanted to see them early so you could get the counters going. If you saw it later when you'd had no time to put counters on it, like then do you a whole
Yep.
lot. So again, it was
Yep.
like a lot of them had really neat effects, like the Mandragora could be really brutal
Yes.
in
Yep.
effect.
I agree. Mandragora's pretty cool.
But
Yeah.
again, if you didn't see it early, then it was kind of
Yeah.
slow.
And they're also really tailored to mono decks, and I think
Yeah.
a lot of elements are not really good in mono anymore. So like mono is just lost a lot of its luster because there are so many insane synergies between elements that by sticking to one element, you're really restricting your like power,
Right.
of like what you can do. So that I think that's actually the main reason the counter ones didn't see as much play. The one I like the most is probably Skeleton because it's an Oriange target. And it's actually the first good one-cost lightning monster for that. So that was actually cool. And then, Mandragora is cool, but unfortunately, Mono Earth, not really viable.
Right.
That was kind of what held that one back. Dandrine Redundancy. Actually, Redundancy, I should mention that. So another issue they have with their monster design is that, they all seem to do, not all of them, but like especially those kind of cycles, the ones that have like a theme and there's one in each element. A lot of them do like the same thing every time. So water bounces, fire does damage, ice styles and freezes. You can't have that much of that. Like,
Right.
if you have that many cards that do the same thing, then once we've got the best one, then none of the others are going to matter until we get another one better than that sort of thing. I mean, that's not entirely true, but like that's the general sort of trajectory of it.
That's a fantastic point because in Opus X, I think it was, the Earth monster was like the Gargonzola, and of course he's an Earth monster, so he gives you +2, and then on damage 5 he give you like +5, and then I think it was the Opus XII guy, he gives you a +2 in Brave. It's like, yeah, we know everything in Earth gives you +2 in Brave. Like that's not, I think John Schreider from RVA made that point about the monks, and he was like, that's why monks like kind of failed to take off, was like the monks, they all do the same thing, +2 in Brave, +3 in Brave. Like we need monks that do something else. He was like, we already do that. You have to give them something else. He pointed out, that's why samurais got successful, was that Cyan introduced this whole new, hey, now I've got this cleave aspect that I'm going to do this big board point damage. Whereas again, if it was just like another +1, another base, it's like, okay, you're just piling on the same effect over and over again.
Yep. No, definitely. Yep. So yeah, that is. Yep. Agreed.
Well, that was all the questions I had on monsters. Is there any kind of closing thoughts you wanted to give, or maybe something you'd been thinking about in your mind? Or you want to mention?
I mean, we can't really talk about monsters without talking about Gesper.
Yeah. Okay. So he's the only banned monster, correct?
Yep.
Again, he was technically before my time, but you could tap him and
fair enough.
had to discard, right?
Yes.
Okay.
During your turn only. It was a multi-unit tap. Both ways to discard a card. But yeah, the problem was like, the idea that effects do as much as they can. So you go to 0, only the opponent discards. And the big issue with that is the moment you have a reliable, your opponent discards every turn, you're effectively almost taking away their draw phase. I mean, not quite, because they get to see the cards before you discard them. But now, any turn they don't draw a card they can play, they've lost that entire turn. And the cards to go with it. Like, they don't even have those cards next turn either. So suddenly all the cards that cost more than 2 plus however many backups they have, which is often not many. So oppressive. I'm not really saying anything here that no one doesn't already know. Like, everyone already knows all this about this card. I think that card should have said either tap as a cost, it would have been a lot worse. I wouldn't have even minded if it was just tap, effect, discard a card if you do your opponent discards a card. I think that would have been much more balanced, much fairer. I honestly wouldn't mind that. I think it's probably still would be degenerate in some way, maybe. I don't know. Like, just in general, those kind of repetitive, persistent discard effects probably shouldn't be in the game anyway. But yeah, they really missed the degenerate part about that card, where you just put yourself to 0 and then just take your opponent's hand away every turn. And
I wasn't playing at that time, but I've seen some of the old streams, and it's just brutal.
It's hyper degen,
like turn 1 or 2, and your opponent, like, they hadn't even played a card yet, and they've got like 2 cards in hand. And it was like, how is that fair?
And then Thaumaturge for some reason buffs itself. That's not about monsters, so I shouldn't go into a different jurisdiction. But the fact that they had so many 2-cost cards that make your opponent discard, and the good ones were multi-unit, and you can just play a bunch of those in your deck, and it's ice, so you've got cheap ways to push blockers out of the way as well. Like, what is your opponent supposed to do? They have no cards to play, and the cards they do play, they just move out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I hope you don't want to play the game today, because I'll just be playing.
Yeah. So, Innocence, actually, that's, no, wait, we're not talking about discard, we're talking about monsters. Never mind.
No, we can do that in a different podcast.
I think maybe the design of Innocence was potentially because of, Turbo Ice, Gesper in general, the idea of because she has an effect that's tap, your opponent discards cards.
Right.
But then, they put...
Basically, yeah.
Yes, but they made heavy restrictions on it.
Right.
So it's repeatable, but, you have to have Innocence in your break zone. You know, it's a light card. It costs an ice CP. You know, they've been a bit more careful now. But yeah. I think that's why maybe the monsters, we haven't really seen any more discarding ones in ice other than Flan. Actually, Flan, that's a monster that was relevant.
Yeah, and searched. I remember the Ice Earth combo a while there too, where because he had searched out the Earth ones, and he kind of had that nice on entry. He was just one, and you could either immediately make him discard, or you could pay an extra one to get him to search and get all the Flans out first. Yeah, he felt really good.
Yeah, so he was one of the very early like reliable engines to generate CP. Like, you know, you play a Flan, and then, you know, from then on, 1 CP gets you 2 CP. So now you have a sort of a way to sort of funnel your like spare CP lying around, or you've got something to do a lot of the time. And it also, again, it gave you that setup where if you were patient, or if, you know, waited a little bit, you could have 3 Flans on the field, and then you take 3 cards away at once. So yeah, I like the decisions it created. I didn't like the fact that it's discard degen, make your own go to 0, top decking, all the stuff I mentioned before. But it was realistically, it was decently designed in terms of a monster that kind of has that flexibility, but not at the cost of being really inefficient. And the fact that it searched Earth CP, I mean, it was sort of degen because Shantoto with discard was a bit, you know, annoying. But, you know, that as a concept though, like outside of the specific cards that were involved in that, as a concept, that's still cool as well, that you can have a mostly one element deck, but you got this monster that will let you get the other element when you need it for a specific thing you want to do without going too far into that element. Like, that part about it was kind of cool as well. So I don't mind when they do those sort of things with, like, you know, elements sort of searching out other elements at will, the extra thing.
One final point here on monsters, which is that monsters don't have summoning sickness like forwards do, so you can often use their dull ability, but that doesn't really translate, like, because if they become a forward, then they are afflicted by summoning sickness and they instantly lose it. You know, they can't attack now that turn. Do you think that possibly holds back their design? Like, do you think the designers are worried about, like, because they can do their thing right away? Do you think that it does affect them?
Yep. I think definitely it would. I think, because there are definitely a lot of forwards that are designed with that in mind. So, you know, they have dull effects that are good, but they're not as good because they have to wait a turn. Right. I think actually, I didn't even think about that until you brought it up, but yeah, you're right. Honestly, that probably is preventing a lot of, you know, tap effects that could be, you know, good or interesting. The fact that you can do it straight away, it does almost becomes kind of an enter as well at the same time. Because anything with a tap ability, the fact that you get to do it every turn, you know, it can't be so good that you've suddenly just act. Again, the monster thing where if you can't kill it, if you don't have a card that specifically says kill a monster, you can't get to it.
Right.
You know, that on top of the fact, that you can do it straight away, that could get out of hand. So yeah, I reckon you're right. I reckon that is also holding that back a bit.
Well, sir, you had some fantastic insights today. I hope our viewers learned a lot. Any shout-outs or plugs you want to give for yourself or anything?
Oh, for myself? No, that's okay. You've already plugged me enough. Give me too much credit as it is. No, thanks a lot for having me. It's really great talking about this.
Dude, it was my pleasure. Actually, thanks for coming on.
No, that's all good. Thanks. You brought up a lot of things that I didn't even think about before when you initially messaged me. So that's awesome.
It's exciting. Yeah. Folks, let us know what you think in the comments. Who's your favorite monster? What's maybe a monster design you'd like to see in the future? What do you think of these new, they become monsters on forward damage that we kind of got revealed for Opus 13? Let us know, and we'll talk to you later. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Take care.
No worries. Cheers to that. Have a good one.